On October 3, 2019, the line at Prairie Crest's cooperative elevator outside Redfield started forming before sunrise, and by 7:15, the pickup cabs were already full of market talk and second-guessing. Bo Murray arrived last in a 1994 Chevrolet K2500 that had 312,000 miles on the odometer, rust eaten through both rocker panels, and a grain shovel wired to the bed with baling twine because the bracket had cracked in 2011, and he had never bothered replacing it. His overalls were faded to a washed-out blue, each knee reinforced with a stitched patch from an old feed sack, and his work boots were clean enough to walk into a courthouse, but old enough to show where the leather had been resoled twice. 3 trucks ahead, Cole Renshaw leaned against a 2018 diesel with polished wheels and dealer tint, and Wade Tripp stood beside a 2020 model still carrying temporary plates from Aberdeen. They were both good farmers, both working hard, both carrying the usual harvest season stress, and both amused by Bo's habits in the same way people get amused by a man who still carries a pocket calendar in a smartphone decade. When Bo stepped onto the scale deck with his paper ledger tucked inside a white feed sack, Wade said, loud enough for the scale house window to hear, that Bo was donating margin to the rest of the county by refusing deferred contracts. Cole added that if a man turned down a better basis on purpose, maybe he should just leave money in the ditch, too. Inside the scale house, manager Dale Kincaid watched the exchange with a half-smile and a coffee cup stamped with Prairie Crest's logo. Dale dressed like an advertisement for confidence. Pressed Western shirt, crisp cap, spotless boots that had seen concrete more than mud. He ran the paperwork fast, talked faster, and had built his reputation on being the man who could squeeze a few extra cents out of a contract window. He liked producers who moved volume, liked numbers on a whiteboard, liked persuasion. Bo was the opposite of persuasion. Bo delivered grain, demanded settlement terms in writing, and asked one question every time. When does title transfer exactly? That question sounded old-fashioned in 2019. It was not old-fashioned. It was risk pricing. Most men in line treated grain delivery as a routine sale. Bo treated it as unsecured credit unless proven otherwise. He looked like the poorest man in the yard, and he was the only one modeling counterparty failure before breakfast. The reason sat 43 years behind his eyes in a memory from 1986 he had never dramatized and never forgotten. Bo was 22 then, and his father, Al Murray, was still farming 480 acres on a mix of owned and rented ground. The local buyer that year had offered attractive deferred settlements, clean paperwork, and a promise that payment timing would optimize tax exposure. Producers delivered, checks lagged, rumors started. By the time the office door locked for good, Al Murray had $74,000 in unpaid grain and no legal priority in the line of claims. He had seed bills due, machinery notes current but tight, and no reserve to absorb a hole that size. The loss did not look cinematic. It looked administrative. A missed payment, then a second. A banker's tone changing by 10% each meeting. Interest adding itself like frost. Al's primary operating note was $182,000 at 10.75%, variable. After the buyer failure, he rolled shortfall into renewed credit at 11.40%. Interest expense for the next 12 months reached $20,748, and that was on money that had produced no crop and bought no asset. It merely covered the absence of money already earned. When commodity prices softened that winter, Al sold 2 pieces of machinery under pressure, paid penalties on an early note adjustment, and still entered spring with less working capital than the previous year. By 1988, he was out, not because he forgot how to farm, but because one unsecured receivable cascaded through an already leveraged balance sheet. Bo remembered the auction more by sound than by sight. Lot numbers called quickly, neighbors quiet, his father speaking less than usual on the truck ride home. That night, he opened a school notebook at the kitchen table and wrote one line in pencil: "No grain leaves my control without verified payment." He never revised it. The rule sounded rigid until he started comparing it against interest math. In 1990, Bo farmed 320 acres on his own, rented 160 more, and produced 51,800 bushels of corn and soybeans combined equivalent. Deferred contracts could offer 6 to 14 cents better on paper, depending on basis and month. On a 50,000 bushel year, giving up 10 cents meant $5,000. Painful. But carrying an operating balance of $250,000 at 9.25% cost $23,125 annually before principal reduction. One payment delay at the wrong moment could force additional borrowing exactly when rates moved against him. So he made a decision that other producers called cautious, and he called arithmetic. He would sell spot, settle immediately, and hold his own cash reserve. He would rather forfeit visible price upside than absorb invisible default risk, plus interest drag, plus legal uncertainty. That posture looked conservative in any single season. Over decades, it became aggressive in the only way that mattered: durability. By 1994, he bought the same Chevrolet he still drove in 2019, used for $11,200 cash. By 1997, he purchased his first 160-acre parcel at $690 per acre, total $110,400, with $40,000 down and a 3-year seller note at 7.00% that he retired in 28 months. After that, he stopped borrowing for land entirely. He did not condemn debt as morality. He evaluated debt as a claim on future options. If a note could force a sale during a bad cycle, the note owned more of his farm than the deed did. Bo did not know, standing in that scale line, how quickly Prairie Crest's confidence would be tested, or how sharply his payment rule would separate him from the rest of the county once the elevator's finances began to crack. Bo's early discipline never looked impressive from the road. His machine shed held equipment that dealerships treated as trade-in leftovers, and he treated as paid-for production tools. In 2003, he bought a John Deere 4440 at auction for $12,800 with 9,100 hours, replaced injector lines and hydraulic seals for $1,860, and ran it for 15 more harvests. In 2008, he purchased a used 7720 combine for $19,150 from an estate sale, put $7,400 into feeder house repairs, and compared that $26,550 total against a new combine option, quoted at $214,000 with a 7-year note at 6.15%. The new machine payment would have been $3,154 per month. Bo kept the old one, carried zero payment, and moved the difference into treasury bills and a reserve account. He kept personal expenses equally plain. Annual household spending averaged $28,740 between 2010 and 2018. Property tax and insurance $11,820, utilities $3,920, food $6,240, vehicle fuel and maintenance $3,980, clothing $460, church and local giving $2,320. Housing payment was zero because the farmhouse had been paid off since 2006. He was not performing poverty. He simply had no interest in financing appearance. The ledger in the feed sack recorded everything in neat block print, year after year, with line items for bushels delivered, price per bushel, date funds cleared, and whether title transferred before or after payment. In 24 of 31 harvests, he accepted a lower posted price than nearby deferred offers. Neighbors saw the lower ticket and assumed missed opportunity. They did not see the avoided carrying costs, the legal insulation, or the compounding effect of keeping cash under his control every season. In one 5-year span alone, from 2012 through 2016, his average immediate sale discount versus deferred alternatives was $0.087 per bushel on an average of 139,400 bushels marketed annually, a nominal give-up of $12,127 per year. Over the same period, comparable operators in the county carried average operating and machinery debt of $1.02 million at blended rates between 4.9 and 6.8%, with annual interest expense often above $56,000. Bo's interest expense over those years, $0. The discount he accepted was visible and finite. The risk he refused was open-ended. That is why, on cold mornings at Prairie Crest, he would stand in patched overalls among newer trucks and listen to jokes without answering. He did not need to win the conversation. He needed to clear settlement. When Dale Kincaid called same-day payment old man fear, Bo signed where he always signed and waited for wire confirmation before releasing title, the way he had done through booms, droughts, and every harvest rumor in between. By harvest end in 2019, most men around Redfield still believed Bo was stubborn, outdated, and leaving money on the table. Bo believed something simpler. Grain sold on credit is a loan, and loans fail. On November 14th, 2019, Dale Kincaid met Bo at the scale window with a printed contract and the kind of smile that signals a lesson is coming. The posted cash bid that morning was $3.91 per bushel for corn. The deferred March settlement contract was $4.02. 11 cents looked obvious. On 42,600 bushels, it looked even more obvious. $4,686 in additional gross revenue if everything went as promised. Dale tapped that line with his pen and asked Bo in front of Cole Renshaw and Wade Tripp why he insisted on farming like it was still 1987. Bo stood there in faded overalls, feed sack under one arm, cap brim frayed white at the edge. Dale stood in a pressed shirt with Prairie Crest stitched above the pocket, polished belt buckle, stainless watch, and clean boots that reflected the fluorescent light from the hallway. Cole had a 2018 diesel idling outside. Wade had a 2020 model with less than 15,000 miles and a payment book that stayed in the center console. Bo had a 1994 Chevrolet with rust through both rocker panels and a shovel tied to the bed with baling twine. That visual contrast carried the social verdict before anyone read a single line of contract language. Dale said the same thing he had been saying all fall. That same-day payment was fear disguised as discipline. He said deferred pricing was standard practice, tax smart, margin smart, and what serious operators did at scale. Cole chuckled. Wade said Bo had donated enough basis over the years to buy himself a newer truck twice. Bo read the page once, folded it back along the crease, and handed it to Dale without signing. Then he signed a cash ticket at $3.91, wrote one instruction beneath his signature in block letters, and waited. Title transfers only after wire confirmation. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend his reputation. He stayed by the office wall while dispatch printed weights, while semis rolled, while the radio in the break room carried weather and futures. At 2:37 that afternoon, First Prairie Bank confirmed incoming wire funds of 100 each 66,500 seats $66.60. Bo wrote the confirmation number beside the ticket line in his ledger, and only then released title. Dale laughed when he saw the notation and told the scale house crew that Bo had paid $4,686 for emotional comfort. By the second week of December, Prairie Crest was asking suppliers for extended terms and delaying non-essential maintenance. The arithmetic that governed Bo that day had been built one season at a time, mostly when no one was watching. After the 1986 buyer failure that took $74,000 from his father, Bo had not become dramatic. He had become procedural. He learned that financial collapse on a farm rarely arrives as one loud event. It arrives as sequence risk. Payment delay forces short-term borrowing. Borrowing at the wrong month meets an adverse rate reset. Rate reset meets a weak market. Weak market meets a forced sale. The farm does not fail because the operator forgot agronomy. It fails because timing and leverage magnify one missed check. In 1989, when Bo first rented ground without his father's guarantee, he wrote a one-page operating protocol and kept it inside a plastic sleeve in the same notebook as his field maps. Rule 1 was payment verification before title release. Rule 2 was no machinery financing beyond 36 months. Rule 3 was maintain 12 months of fixed expenses in cash equivalents. Rule 4 was no personal spending that required annual yield assumptions to justify. He revised fertilizer plans every year. He never revised those 4 rules. His numbers in the early years were narrow and plain. In 1990, gross crop revenue was 100 NOK $12,840 on 480 acres. Total operating expense was $84,730, leaving $28,110 before taxes and household draw. He kept $19,000 in reserve and carried $0 of machinery debt into 1991. In 1992, drought trimmed yields and gross fell to 97,320, but he still closed the year with 14,200 in net positive cash flow because he deferred repairs, ran older iron, and did not owe principal payments on depreciating equipment. In 1994, he bought the Chevrolet for 11,200 cash and drove it home without a note. The discipline looked stubborn through the 1990s, especially when neighboring operators financed newer combines at 7.40 to 8.10% and wrote off depreciation aggressively. Bo tracked the same machines with a different pencil. A $148,000 combine, financed over 7 years at 7.75%, carried a payment near $2,260 monthly. Total paid around $189,840 before major rebuild costs. A used unit bought for $26,400 and repaired for $9,300 could be slower and less comfortable, yet still clear grain when weather windows were managed well. Bo accepted inconvenience. He refused fixed obligations that could not negotiate with drought. His ledger from those years reads like a calm argument against panic growth. 1997, bought 160 acres at $690 per acre, $110,400 total, paid off seller note in 28 months. 1999, grain bin expansion, 42,000 cash, avoided seasonal basis pressure on 31,000 bushels. 2001, Sold 2 underused tillage tools, 11,800, redirected proceeds to reserve account. 2003. Bought John Deere 444 Oaks for 12,800. Repairs 1,860. No lien filed. 2006. Farmhouse mortgage retired. Housing payment 0. 2008. Bought used 7720 combine for 19,150. Repairs 7,400. Total 26,550 against new, quote, 214,000. 2011, replaced truck transmission for 2,890 instead of replacing truck. 2014, Treasury ladder reached 640,000. 2017, land base at 1,920 acres, all owned, no operating note drawn. Those entries were not romantic. They were repetitive by design. Bo did not seek perfect prices. He sought controlled exposure. Across 31 harvests before Prairie Crest failed, he accepted lower immediate pricing in 24 years for a cumulative nominal concession of $312,400. That figure sounded large at coffee tables. In the same period, he avoided an estimated $1.96 million in default and financing drag that hit peers during at least 3 stress cycles: the late 1990s local buyer failures, the 2008 credit tightening, and the 2014 to 2016 commodity downturn. The choice was never 11 cents versus 0. It was 11 cents versus counterparty uncertainty plus interest, plus legal costs, plus optionality loss. If you want to know why that one mock decision in November became county-level history by spring, stay with this part of the story because the next numbers are where perception finally ran out of room. On January 6, 2020, Prairie Crest froze producer payments. The notice was short. The consequences were not. By late January, bankruptcy protection filings showed $18.7 million in grain liabilities and only $2.9 million in liquid cash. Unsecured producer claims moved to the same legal queue as other obligations, exactly when input bills for the next crop year were arriving. The men and women hit by that gap were not reckless caricatures. They were competent operators who had followed common practice and trusted routine settlement channels that had worked for years. Ben Holter was owed $214,300 on soybean contracts. His land note required $4,870 each month at 6.25%. Missing one payment triggered a default notice window. Missing 2 initiated legal action language his family had never seen before. Ben sold stored corn into a weak market to stay current, then drew short-term credit at 8.10% to cover fertilizer, paying interest on money that should have already been his. Lyle Jensen was carrying $1.14 million across operating and equipment notes when payments froze. He had expanded rented acres during the strong years and financed accordingly. 2 missed installments cost him 640 rented acres and forced the sale of 1 late-model tractor at a distressed price. He did not lose those acres because he lacked work ethic. He lost them because timing and leverage left no cushion when receivables turned into court documents. Carmen Ruiz was owed $163,900 and had to liquidate 220 cow-calf pairs at winter discount pricing to meet payroll and feed obligations. The forced sale recovered cash fast, but destroyed earning capacity for the following season. Rebuilding a herd is expensive. Rebuilding momentum is worse. Ethan Pike, 27 years old and close to buying his first quarter section, held $89,200 in unpaid wheat proceeds and missed his closing window. His lender did not reject him for character. The lender required verified liquidity that was locked in bankruptcy process. Through all of it, Bo's November wire sat cleared in his account with a timestamp, a confirmation code, and no dispute. He did not celebrate that difference. He used it. He paid spring input invoices early where discounts were real and contractual, not speculative. He offered Ben and Carmen short bridge checks for fuel and seed with handwritten terms on one page. 0 interest for 90 days, automatic extension if bankruptcy court delayed distributions, monthly cash flow review at his kitchen table. No speeches, just terms. And when the first creditor hearing date was set in Aberdeen, Bo packed the same feed sack, the same ledger, and the same boots with the second soles, because in his framework the point had never been to look right. The point was to be paid before the risk moved downstream into someone else's emergency. In Aberdeen, that principle moved from a private habit to sworn record. The first creditor hearing opened at 9:03 in a room that looked built for routine probate, not agricultural triage. Folding tables, fluorescent lights, binders stacked by claim class. Producers sat in winter coats with legal pads on their knees. Dale Kincaid sat with Prairie Crest Counsel, 2 rows ahead, still upright, still composed, still using the language of temporary disruption. When the trustee began reading account summaries, most entries carried the same pattern: delivered bushels, posted contract value, unpaid balance, unsecured status. Then came Bo Murray. The trustee paused, adjusted his glasses, and read the line twice. Delivered bushels, documented. Settlement confirmed November 14th, 2019. 0 receivable. 0 dispute. Paid in full prepetition. Bo did not look up when heads turned. He opened the feed sack, removed the ledger, and handed forward 30 years of pages in block print. The record was not dramatic. It was methodical. Ticket number, date, price, settlement time, bank confirmation code, title transfer note. That ledger converted reputation into arithmetic in less than 20 minutes. What followed was the sequence that had built his balance sheet, while he looked, from the highway, like a man falling behind. 1990. Farmed 480 acres equivalent. Gross revenue $112,840. Net operating surplus $28,110. Reserve carryover $19,000. 1991. Bought no major equipment. Repaired planter and grain auger for $2,170. Year-end liquid reserve $33,240. 1992 drought. Gross down to $97,320. Still closed, positive $14,200. Debt service 0. 1994. Purchased used 1994 Chevrolet K2500 for $11,200 cash. No vehicle loan. Reserve after purchase $41,890. 1997. Acquired 160 acres at $690 per acre. Total $110,400. Paid $40,000 down. Seller note retired in 28 months. 1999. Built grain storage for $42,000 cash, reducing forced harvest sales on 31,000 bushels. 2003. Bought John Deere 4440 for $12,800. Repairs $1,860. Total $14,660. 2006. Retired remaining farmhouse, mortgage balance, $38,450. Housing payment dropped to 0. 2008. Bought used 7720 combine for $19,150. Repairs $7,400. Total $26,550 versus new, quote, $214,000 financed. 2011. Transmission replacement on truck, $2,890, avoided replacement note. 2014. Treasury ladder reached 640,000 across staggered maturities. 2017. Land base reached 1,920 acres, all owned free and clear. 2019. Accepted cash price 3.91 instead of deferred 4.02 on 42,600 bushels. Collected 166,500 to 66.60 same day, no receivable exposure. The banker from First Prairie, Marlene Voss, testified after lunch with 3 schedules that mattered more than any rumor at the Scale House. Schedule 1, Beau's average annual nominal price concession versus deferred alternatives, $10,077 over 31 harvests, cumulative $312,400. Schedule 2, estimated avoided financing and default drag under observed county conditions, $1.96 million. Schedule 3, current position as of December 31st, 2019. Cash and treasuries $2.48 million. Farm real estate 1,920 acres. Owned outright at conservative assessed value $4.06 million. Machinery lion balance 0. Net worth, after deferred tax assumptions and working obligations, $6.11 million. The room did not explode. It recalibrated. By early March 2020, 3 neighboring counties had started using the phrase settlement risk in ordinary elevator conversation, usually for the first time. The shift showed up in places that rarely carried philosophical debate: lender callback notes, coffee line legal pads, quick penciled comparisons between basis gain and counterparty exposure. At a kitchen table outside Turton, 2 brothers running shared equipment spread a legal envelope beside seed invoices and drew 2 columns from Voss's testimony. One column read, plus 0.10 now, unsecured until paid. The other read cash now, title after wire. Their lender, on speakerphone, did not tell them which column to pick. He only asked what each choice did to April liquidity if one buyer froze. 3 days after the hearing, an Arctic front settled across northeastern South Dakota, and propane costs jumped while cash flow projections were already strained. Crisis did not arrive once. It arrived in layers. Spring 2020 brought pandemic logistics disruptions that widened basis unpredictably and slowed parts delivery. Summer brought dry conditions in pockets across Spink and Brown counties, trimming yield expectations by late July. For leveraged farms, even before later rate cycles and inflation pressure, the 2020 stack was difficult arithmetic. Uncertain receivable timing, volatile input procurement, and weather-driven yield risk landing in the same operating window. The contrast with peers became clearest, not in speeches, but in amortization tables. Cole Renshaw, who had laughed in the line that October morning, ran a strong operation on roughly 2,300 acres with good yields and disciplined fieldwork. But he had financed growth through cycles that did not forgive interruption. His 2018 diesel carried a $742 monthly payment. His combine note, refinanced in 2019, required $3,675 each month at 5.90%, with a balloon due in year 7. Equipment debt by January 2020 stood at $612,000. Operating credit, seasonal but large, peaked at $480,000 each spring. He was not careless. He was conventional. When $148,700 in grain, receivables froze in the Prairie Crest case, he covered payroll and fertilizer with emergency credit at 8.35%. Interest for that season alone rose by $21,900 compared with his prior plan. Wade Tripp's structure was similar and even tighter on timing. He had signed a land contract on 320 acres in 2018, 1.28 million purchase price, 20% down, balance amortized over 20 years at 6.10%. Monthly obligation, $7,334. His newer pickup and strip-till rig added $1,860 monthly. He was a diligent operator who never missed a spray window and kept meticulous agronomy records, yet his liquidity cushion was thin because cash had been routed to down payments and equipment upgrades. Prairie Crest owed him $126,400 at filing. With settlement frozen, he delayed dry fertilizer, paid a premium for late-season application, and saw 2020 yield drag by enough bushels to erase the basis gains he had chased with deferred contracts. Ben Holter, Lyle Jensen, Carmen Ruiz, and Ethan Pike were the names everyone already knew, but the courtroom exhibits showed a wider pattern. 11 claimants in the same marketing pool carried combined secured debt of $9.74 million. Average liquidity on hand when payments froze was 0.8 months of operating expense. 6 had less than 30 days. They had trusted an institution that had settled reliably for years, then met a legal reality they had never priced. Unsecured grain is an interest-free loan from producer to buyer until money clears. No one who studied those files left believing failure came from laziness. The prevailing consensus among lenders by mid-2020 was more nuanced and more uncomfortable. Good operators had accepted counterparty exposure because the system normalized it. Bo had treated it as a priced risk because his father had lived the downside. Bo's progression after the hearing remained almost stubbornly plain. He did not buy a new truck. He did not expand into distant rented ground. He kept his annual household budget between $30,000 and $34,000, even as commodity volatility rewarded operators with larger scale and sharper marketing programs. He directed liquidity with the same hierarchy. Taxes first, prepaid inputs where discounts were contractual, 12 months of fixed costs ring-fenced, then treasury purchases, then opportunistic land only if cash purchase preserved the reserve floor. In 2020, after spring input bills and local bridge checks, he still closed with $2.31 million in cash equivalents. He also converted liquidity into targeted stabilization for others. The 90-day bridge checks from early 2020 became formal, principal-only notes later that year under attorney review, each with monthly cash flow reporting and clear collateral language where appropriate. Ben Holter received $120,000 across 2 tranches, allowing current payments on the 6.25% land note while bankruptcy proceeds remained uncertain. Carmen Ruiz received $90,000 to avoid selling the remainder of her breeding stock into a weak winter market. Ethan Pike received $60,000 tied to closing cost timing and operating cushion so he could preserve lender confidence on his first land purchase plan. Lyle Jensen received $140,000 with the condition that he liquidate 2 underutilized finance machines and reset acreage to a level serviceable from operating cash. By the first week of September 2020, court filings showed Prairie Crest's asset sale process moving toward auction, and Bo arrived with the same old truck, the same patched overalls, and a cashier letter confirming available funds. He was not there to relive vindication. He was there to purchase infrastructure under rules that removed unsecured producer credit from the center of the model. Cash settlement, segregated customer funds, daily reconciliation, no exceptions written in small print. That was the moment his private farm rule started becoming county policy. In the post-2020 period, the financial divergence only sharpened. In 2021, higher corn prices lifted Bo's gross receipts by 14.8%. He moved 410,000 into short-duration treasuries yielding between 0.62 and 1.14%. Modest return, but full control. In 2022, as rates rose, new Treasury purchases averaged 3.87%, and later tranches reached 4.92%, turning liquidity discipline into income rather than idle protection. The same years tightened everyone else's constraints. Operating lines that had renewed near 4% were resetting between 7.25 and 9.00, depending on collateral and lender appetite, while input inflation stacked on top. Anhydrous ammonia, quotes that had hovered around 510 per ton, moved above 1,200 at peak windows. Diesel climbed and cash rent held firm because land competition did not pause for liquidity stress. For leverage farms, that combination became brutal arithmetic. A 1,000-acre corn operation applying 170 pounds of nitrogen equivalent per acre could see fertilizer cost increase by more than 90,000 year over year under those spikes before seed, chemical, fuel, and labor. If receivables were trapped in bankruptcy and interest expense doubled, operators were forced into defensive decisions that reduced future earning capacity. Delayed maintenance, lower nutrient rates, distressed equipment sales, or lost leases. Bo entered the same policy turbulence, the same input market, and the same weather volatility with one structural advantage: no mandatory debt service clock. His fixed obligations were property tax, insurance, utilities, and ordinary operating costs he could scale with acreage decisions. When fertilizer prices blew out, he prepaid only the acres he intended to plant and reduced non-core rented ground instead of borrowing to maintain ego acreage. When rates climbed, his treasury ladder rolled into higher yields instead of higher loan costs. In 2022, Treasury interest alone added $93,100 to his income statement. That number almost matched what some peers paid in annual note interest. And it became the quiet hinge in a louder room when the Prairie Crest asset auction opened in Aberdeen on September 10th, 2020. Most producers came to watch, some came to bid on augers and office furniture, and a few regional buyers came with acquisition packets already printed. Bo came with a cashier letter from First Prairie Bank and a legal folder held shut by a rubber band. The trustee offered the loadout: dryer, truck scale, and grain handling legs as one package, with environmental and licensing contingencies stated twice for the record. Opening bid came in at $290,000 from a regional grain group. A second bidder pushed to $335,000. Then a third moved to $372,000. The room turned when Bo, in the same patched overalls and old work boots, raised his card and said, "410, cash close. No flourish, just terms." Counsel for the estate requested proof of funds before accepting the jump. Marlene Voss stood, walked to the clerk, and submitted a verification letter timed at 8:41 that morning. Available cash and treasuries under Bo Murray control, $2,486,440.12, unencumbered. Additional farm real estate equity, $4,060,000 assessed. Machinery lions, 0. The clerk read the figure into the record. People who had joked in the scale line 11 months earlier stopped writing and looked up. Cole Renshaw sat in the back row and stared at the rust-stained cuff on Bo's left sleeve, as if the fabric itself needed reconciling with the number. Wade Tripp folded his arms and nodded once, not at the bid, but at the logic he had resisted. Ben Holter did not smile. He exhaled, long and tired, with the expression of a man who had spent months learning that risk can hide inside familiar paperwork. No one beat $410,000. The trustee struck the sale. Closing deadline was 48 hours. Bo funded escrow that afternoon, and by 4:16 the wire had cleared in full, including $12,780 in transfer, filing, and statutory handling fees. On paper, the cooperative's broken core had moved into a new producer entity with a blunt operating policy. Title transfer after confirmed same-day ACH or wire, customer funds segregated, no use of producer receivables for operating float. Dale Kincaid tried one last route to relevance during the compliance hearing attached to the sale. Through counsel, he petitioned to remain as contract manager under supervisory restriction, arguing continuity and local relationships. The judge denied the petition in open court and cited negligent commingling practices, documented in the bankruptcy exhibits. The order barred Dale from licensed grain facility management for 5 years. It was not shouted. It was entered. Dale gathered his files, said nothing to the producers in the hallway, and left with his counsel through the west door. 3 weeks later, at the end of September 2020, Bo invited 12 affected operators to his shop for coffee, legal packets, and the least theatrical act of the entire saga. He offered principal-only bridge notes at 0% interest, 5-year term, monthly reporting, and a mandatory covenant that each signer would never again leave an unpaid grain ticket unsecured beyond documented settlement terms. Total available pool, $600,000. Distribution was not equal, because damage had not been equal. Ben Holter received $120,000, split into $80,000 immediate liquidity and $40,000 contingent draw tied to spring input timing. His use of funds schedule was precise. Catch up one land installment, lock fertilizer early at lower winter pricing, preserve operating line headroom so emergency credit did not compound at punitive rates. Lyle Jensen received $140,000 with conditions he accepted after 2 difficult meetings. He had to sell 2 finance tractors, terminate 1 marginal lease, and submit a quarterly working capital target. The note did not punish him. It forced a reset to acreage his cash flow could support. Carmen Ruiz received $90,000 in 2 tranches to stop forced herd liquidation and rebuild feed security. Her reporting template included calf retention ratios, hay inventory coverage, and a 6-month reserve target tied to average winter carrying cost. Ethan Pike received $60,000 linked to closing requirements and operating cushion, enough to restore lender confidence and preserve his first land purchase trajectory. The remaining $190,000 went to 8 producers whose names had appeared less often in courtroom talk, but whose balance sheets had been hit all the same. Nora Ellings, $30,000, Grant Phelps, $28,000, Isaac Dorn, $25,000, Megan Talbot, $22,000, Owen Braddock, $24,000, Heidi Lark, $20,000, Samir Nadeem, $21,000, and Tyler Boone, $20,000. Each note carried the same core rule set and the same monthly 1-page report. No hidden fees, no compounding clauses, no prepayment penalty. No one in the shop argued about whether 9 or 10 cents on a deferred ticket looked attractive in a clean spreadsheet. They had all lived the other side of that spread. Bo did not lecture about it. He slid each packet across the steel table, tapped the settlement covenant with 1 finger, and waited until each signer read the line twice before he pointed to the signature block. The paperwork ran longer than expected because Bo and the attorney reviewed each schedule out loud. Beginning cash. Accounts payable, due in 30 days, Accounts payable, due in 60 days. Grain sold but not yet settled. Must read 0 unless covered by documented settlement terms. Current operating line balance. Planned large purchases. A short note section for anything unusual. Illness, weather loss, equipment failure, so the report stayed useful and did not turn into theater. Ben signed first, then paused with the pen still in his hand. If I can lock NH3 in January instead of March, that contingent 40 opens? When vendor quote and delivery window are in writing, Bo said. You send both with the monthly sheet. We release from the second tranche after review. Ben nodded and signed the last page. Lyle was slower. He had written his initials in the margin beside the tractor sale covenant before the meeting even started, as if arguing with ink. 2 units go, he said, not 1. 2, Bo said. If 1 stays financed, this turns into carryover pressure again. Lyle stared at the table for a long 10 seconds, then signed without looking up. Then 2 go. Carmen brought a yellow pad with herd counts and feed projections written in tidy columns. She asked 3 questions about reserve targets and 1 about calf retention during a bad weather month. Bo answered each with the same steady cadence he used at the bank. First define minimum cash days, then define feed coverage, then set the draw trigger so panic selling does not decide the plan. She signed, clipped her copy into a folder, and asked for an extra blank template for her bookkeeper. Ethan arrived with lender conditions folded into his coat pocket and unfolded them flat beside the note. Debt service ratio threshold. Liquidity covenant. Closing checklist for the 160-acre purchase timeline. Bo read the page, wrote 2 reporting dates in the margin, and added a reminder that title transfer language had to match lender counsel. Language exactly. Ethan signed, then asked if sending scans by phone counted as on time. Bo said yes if the numbers were legible and backed by statements within 48 hours. The 8 smaller notes moved quickly but not casually. Nora asked for a simplified template she could complete after evening chores. Bo handed her one with the same fields and fewer headings. Grant asked whether a missed report triggered default. The attorney answered that 1 missed report triggered a cure notice, 2 required a face-to-face review. Isaac and Megan requested aligned due dates so they could submit together after local bookkeeping night at the co-op office. Owen asked to prepay without fee if his receivable cleared early. Any month, Bo said. No penalty. Heidi asked whether inventory counted at market or conservative value. Conservative, Bo said. Samir asked whether the covenant prohibited delayed pricing contracts outright. It prohibits unsecured exposure, Bo said. Tyler signed in silence, then asked for 1 extra copy for his spouse. When the last signature dried, Bo stacked the originals, placed them back in the rubber-banded folder, and wrote 1 line on the outside in block print. Principal only / monthly reporting / title after funds clear. It was the same logic he had carried in a white feed sack for decades, now moved from private habit into shared structure. 2 mornings later, the facility office opened under new management protocols. A fresh sheet was taped to the scale window above the ticket printer. Settlement confirmation required before title transfer. The language was plain enough to survive fatigue and harvest noise. No one needed interpretation. At 9:12, the first load crossed the truck scale under the new policy. Moisture and test weight were posted. Ticket printed, settlement method selected, wire instruction confirmed. The clerk, trained that week on the revised sequence, did not release title when the truck rolled out. She released it after confirmation pinged in from the bank terminal, and the timestamp was entered beside the ticket number. The process took minutes longer than the old system and removed an entire category of silent risk. That afternoon, Cole found Bo at the fuel pump beside the old Chevrolet, salt stains dried into last winter's lines and new dust already settling over old rust. Cole kept his eyes on the nozzle handle and said, "I was wrong about the joke." Bo capped the tank and looked at him. "How's your spring prepay looking?" Cole gave numbers, not excuses. Operating line rate, fertilizer window, equipment note pressure. Bo listened, asked two short questions about receivable timing, and told him to send any contract with deferred language through counsel before he signed it. Cole nodded once and drove off without trying to make the moment cleaner than it was. Wade came by the shop near dusk to pick up a blank copy of the reporting page, even though he had not taken a bridge note. He stood at the door, hat in his hands, and read the settlement covenant in silence. "You got one extra?" he asked. Bo handed him a copy. Wade folded it into quarters, put it in his shirt pocket, and said, "I'll use it." He did not say where, and Bo did not ask. By the time the lights were shut off, the Act people had mocked as caution, had become procedure, then contract, then governance. Nothing about it looked dramatic from the road. Bo still drove the 1994 K2500 with the shovel tied down in baling twine. He still logged confirmation numbers by hand. The appearance never caught up to the arithmetic, and he had never asked it to. The discipline was built to survive strain first and reputation second. The next reporting deadline came 12 days later, and that is where the rescue either becomes discipline or becomes another delayed collapse. Bo sat at the same steel table with a calculator, a yellow legal pad, and 12 envelopes arranged by due date. He did not grade effort. He graded cash flow. Ben Holter's first package showed $214,300 still frozen in bankruptcy claim status, $4,870 due on the land note, and input bids that would rise if he waited. Bo released the contingent $40,000 tranche after Ben attached written vendor quotes and delivery windows exactly as required. Ben used $26,840 for nitrogen and phosphate prepay, $7,130 for diesel and repairs, and held the balance as a buffer against spring volatility. By August 2021, Ben had stabilized enough to renegotiate his land note from 6.25% to 5.05%, with a local lender who had seen 6 straight months of accurate reporting. By June 2023, after 2 partial bankruptcy distributions and disciplined marketing, he refinanced again at 4.10% fixed, trimmed his monthly payment by $920, and stopped borrowing for in-season surprises. By fall 2025, he had repaid $80,000 of Bo's note and had not missed a single reporting month. Lyle Jensen's file was harder and more honest. The first quarter showed what he had resisted admitting in 2020. His acreage had outrun his liquidity. Under the covenant, he sold 2 financed tractors, a 2019 front-wheel assist unit, and a high-hour loader tractor, netting $186,000 after liens and transaction costs. The sale was painful and correct. He terminated 1 high-rent lease and stepped down from 1,600 acres to 960 acres that he could support from operating cash plus conservative credit. His operating note peak fell from the prior cycle by 31%. Interest expense dropped from $74,200 in 2020 to $39,850 in 2022. Then to $33,110 in 2024 as rates and balances moved in his favor. By the second week of October 2025, Lyle carried positive working capital again and had repaid $110,000 of his $140,000 principal-only note. Carmen Ruiz used her first $90,000 tranche with precision That surprised lenders who had underestimated livestock arithmetic. She protected breeding stock, secured hay before late winter spikes, and tracked retention ratios monthly instead of seasonally. Her herd, which had been forced down by emergency liquidation, climbed from 180 retained pairs after the crisis to 242 by late 2021, 286 by 2023, and 310 by fall 2025. She rebuilt a 6-month cash reserve tied to actual winter carrying cost, not hopeful sale timing. Her reserve target in 2025 was 184,000, and she held 191,300 by September. She repaid 65,000 of principal and pre-filed a plan to clear the remainder by scheduled maturity. Ethan Pike's trajectory looked modest on paper and profound in practice. The 60,000 note restored his liquidity ratios, but the deeper change was procedural. He never signed another grain contract without council review, and he never delivered without settlement language that matched his lender terms. He closed on 160 acres with 35% down, financed the balance conservatively, and maintained a separate tax and repairs subaccount so annual shocks did not spill into operating cash. In 5 harvests after Prairie Crest, Ethan never carried an unpaid grain ticket. Not once. He repaid his full 60,000 principal ahead of schedule in March 2025. The 8 smaller notes produced the same pattern at smaller scale. Nora Ellings used 30,000 to prevent high-rate vendor carry and repaid 24,000 by 2025 while maintaining current payables. Grant Phelps cleared his 28,000 in full by selling excess inventory and tightening machinery replacement timing. Isaac Dorn repaid 19,000 of 25,000 and converted his marketing routine to same-day settlement only. Megan Talbot repaid 17,000 of 22,000 and moved her bookkeeping cycle to monthly reconciliations that lenders could trust. Owen Braddock repaid his 24,000 in full without penalty, exactly as he had asked. Heidi Lark repaid 15,000 of 20,000 while preserving conservative inventory valuation and no delinquent bills. Samir Nadim repaid 16,000 of 21,000 and shifted contract review through council before signature. Tyler Boone repaid 17,000 of 20,000 and added spouse co-review on all delivery paperwork, the reason he asked for that extra copy in Bo's shop. By harvest 2024, the 12 operators who took bridge notes held a combined 6,840 acres in production control versus 5,210 in the immediate post-bankruptcy trough. Their aggregate machinery debt fell from $4.32 million at note origination to $2.71 million. Their average current ratio improved from 0.86 to 1.34. None had a disputed grain ticket under the new settlement protocol. One disciplined lender in Redfield called it the most unremarkable miracle he had seen, because every gain came from ordinary decisions repeated on schedule. Let me stop here and ask you something. When a 10-cent basis improvement is offered on paper, do you price only the upside, or do you price who is carrying the risk until funds clear? That question is where this entire county divided and then slowly came back together. The multiplier effect became visible in county tax rolls and school board budgets before anyone called it philosophy. The producers Bo stabilized did not become headline wealth stories. They became solvent families who paid bills on time, kept acreage productive, and stopped forced sales that depress everyone around them. By 2025, those 12 operations supported 27 full-time jobs and 41 seasonal positions. Combined gross farm revenue that year reached $23.4 million, and local purchases from fuel, parts, feed, and service vendors exceeded $6.2 million. The $600,000 bridge pool, structured at zero interest and strict reporting, prevented far larger losses that would have spread through lenders, landlords, and suppliers. Dale Kincaid's resolution was less dramatic and more instructive. After the court order barred him from licensed grain facility management for 5 years, he relocated to Sioux Falls and took a non-fiduciary agronomy sales role with a regional input firm. He remained in agriculture, but he no longer handled producer settlements, escrow, or title transfer administration. During his first year away from elevator management, he stayed mostly silent in public, answered only direct questions, and avoided county meetings where Prairie Crest was still an open wound. In 2023, at a compliance seminar attended by lenders, agronomists, and cooperative staff from the 3 counties, Dale was asked during a panel break what had gone wrong. He did not deny the record. He said unsecured deferred grain had been, in his words, a risk model failure that everybody treated as routine until liquidity broke. He did not ask for sympathy. He did not receive mockery. People wrote the sentence down because it matched what the court documents had already shown. He kept that line in later conversations. No reinvention story. No courtroom theatrics after the fact. He sold crop input programs, earned commissions, and stayed out of fiduciary control. By fall 2025, he was still in Sioux Falls, still in agronomy sales, and still outside licensed grain management. That arc closed exactly where the judge placed it. If you are learning something from this stretch of the story, tap like and share it with one producer who still treats settlement language as routine fine print. Cole Renshaw and Wade Tripp, the first men to laugh in line, did not become villains and did not vanish. Cole restructured equipment in 2021, sold one underused header, and adopted the same settlement covenant for every load. He still farmed substantial acres by 2025, with tighter liquidity discipline and fewer assumptions about who held risk between scale ticket and cash receipt. Wade kept his 320-acre contract, slowed capital purchases, and started running contract language past counsel before harvest. He carried pride and pressure in equal measure, but he stayed in the game. Both men later told younger operators the same short lesson. Price risk before you price basis. Marlene Voss remained at First Prairie Bank through 2024, then moved to a regional credit role overseeing agricultural risk policy. She used anonymized Prairie Crest-era case data in training modules on counterparty exposure, settlement controls, and liquidity stress testing. The trustee who read Bo's zero receivable line retired in 2022. The attorney who drafted the 12 bridge notes still keeps a template named Murray Settlement Covenant in his office software, updated for statutes and unchanged in spirit. Bo's own operation looked almost unchanged to anyone driving past on Highway 212. The 1994 Chevrolet K2500 remained in service, odometer at 347,000 by September 2025, rust still visible, shovel still secured with baling twine because replacing a working tie point did not improve cash flow. The John Deere 4440 still handled chore work. The old 7720 combine had been retired from primary harvest and kept as backup after meticulous maintenance, a machine with more history than shine. His overalls still carried patches. His household budget still stayed plain. Appearance never caught the balance sheet. The balance sheet, however, had advanced. After taxes, conservative land valuation adjustments, treasury income, and the $2 million endowment transfer into the Murray Grain Reliability Fund, Bo's documented net worth stood at $6.84 million in fall 2025. The fund paid legal review fees for young producers before contract signature, not after disputes. In its first year, it covered 73 reviews across 5 counties at an average cost of $612 per file, then denied 7 contracts with settlement language that shifted unpriced risk onto growers. Those 7 producers rewrote terms before delivery. None entered unsecured claims. Every name thread closed. Ben kept his land and rebuilt optionality. Lyle downsized and regained working capital. Carmen rebuilt to 310 pairs and restored reserves. Ethan bought his first 160 acres and stayed clear of unpaid tickets. Nora, Grant, Isaac, Megan, Owen, Heidi, Samir, and Tyler each remained operating and current under their respective plans. Cole and Wade adjusted course and remained farmers. Marlene translated one county's failure into institutional training. Dale worked in a role where he could not repeat the same fiduciary errors. Bo stayed what he had always been, understated, debt-averse, and governed by arithmetic. Before we leave Redfield, subscribe for more stories where balance sheets tell the truth that appearances hide. Then comment with one contract clause you now refuse to sign without legal review. Share this with the youngest operator in your family or on your section line, the one being told that speed matters more than settlement certainty. On a cool morning late in harvest, Bo parked the old Chevrolet beside the scale he now co-owned through the producer entity, stepped out in patched overalls, and waited for the terminal confirmation tone before Title moved on another load. No speech, no victory lap. Just a timestamp entered by hand beside a ticket number, the same way he had done it for decades. The farmer who looked poorest had already been paid, and because he acted on that rule, a county learned to get paid before trust turned into exposure. The terminal beep faded, and Bo waited for the printed receipt before he moved. The clerk slid the ticket through the window, then turned the monitor so he could see the settlement line. Funds received, title released, timestamp 9/14/22. Bo wrote the same time in his paper ledger, closed the feed sack, and nodded once. Cole watched from 2 bays over, then walked across with his gloves still on. "I kept staring at that patch last year," Cole said, looking at Bo's knee seam instead of his face. "I thought it meant you were behind. It meant you were free." Bo capped his pen. "It meant I do not buy what I do not need." Wade pulled in behind Cole's trailer, stepped down, and finished the sentence he had swallowed at the shop door in 2020. "I had a contract in my pocket that day. Deferred, unsecured. I tore it up in the truck before I went home." He held up a new packet with council initials on the cover page. "I do not sign a loan anymore." By the first Monday of November 2025, the final bridge note review meeting filled Bo's shop again. Same steel table, same overhead light, same coffee thermos with the dent near the handle. The difference was the stack on Bo's right side. In 2020, it had been 12 unsigned rescue packets. In 2025, it was 12 payoff summaries, each clipped to monthly reports that had turned panic into routine. Ben Holter sat first and handed over a cashier check for $40,000, the remaining balance on his principal. Bo checked the amount against the ledger line and passed the release across the table. Ben read it twice, then folded it carefully. "We are current on land, current on inputs, and 2026 fertilizer is half locked," he said. "No unpaid tickets, not one." Lyle Jensen came in with 2 folders and no defensiveness left. He placed $30,000 down, final installment, and then put the second folder beside it. It held his current ratio worksheet, 1.41 as of October close. "You were right about acreage ego," he said quietly. 960 cash flows. $1,600 did not. Bo stamped, paid in full, and handed him the original note from the rubber-banded archive. Carmen Ruiz arrived with her bookkeeper and a calving sheet. She paid $25,000, clearing her remaining principal, and then pointed to the reserve line on her report. $191,300 liquid, 6 months protected. 310 pairs now, she said. No forced sale this winter. Bo smiled, small and brief, and wrote closed beside her name. Ethan Pike was last of the larger notes, because he had driven in from his 160-acre quarter after finishing a drainage repair before freeze. He had already paid in March, yet he still came with a binder of every settlement confirmation from the last 5 harvests. He set it on the table and tapped the tabs. I wanted you to see it went where it was supposed to go. Bo opened the binder, saw 5 years of timestamps and cleared funds, and slid it back. Keep that, he said. That is your armor? The 8 smaller notes closed in the same room over that week, one by one, and each closing had the same ritual. Nora Ellings paid her final $6,000. Grant Phelps had cleared his months earlier and brought donuts instead of paper. Isaac Dorn paid the last $6,000 and asked the attorney to keep his covenant template active. Megan Talbot paid $5,000 and left with a lender pre-approval letter for a storage upgrade she could buy with cash by spring. Owen Braddock had been complete for months and came only to witness Tyler Boone sign his final $3,000. Heidi Lark paid $5,000 and handed Bo a handwritten thank you note that said, in one line, reporting is cheaper than regret. Samir Nadim paid $5,000 and asked whether the fund would review a multi-buyer contract his cousin had received. Bo told him to send it. Tyler paid his balance with his spouse, seated beside him, just as he had promised when he asked for that extra copy in 2020. The arithmetic of that table was plain and durable. Principal issued $600,000. Principal repaid by October 2025, $600,000. Interest charged, $0. Delinquent notes, 0. Farm still operating, 12 of 12. Acres retained or recovered under those operators, 6,840. Estimated forced liquidation value avoided during the crisis years, $2.3 million, based on county auction comps and lender files reviewed by Marlene Voss's regional team. 3 days later, Marlene called Bo from her new office and closed the last external loop. Your compliance packet from the producer entity cleared state review this morning, she said. No deficiencies, daily reconciliation and logs complete. Segregated funds testing passed. Bo wrote the call outcome in the ledger margin, date, and time, then thanked her and hung up. 1 hour after that, the attorney emailed signed releases for all 12 notes and confirmed the originals were stored in a fireproof archive with scanned copies in the Murray Grain Reliability Fund records. The physical trail was complete. No loose papers, no unsigned pages, no unresolved claims. Dale Kincaid's final turn came in December 2025 at a winter risk workshop in Sioux Falls in a hotel ballroom that smelled of coffee and wet coats. He was there as an agronomy sales representative. Name badge plain, no cooperative title under his name. After the panel, he stood near the back, while producers gathered around the handouts. Cole asked him directly whether he still believed deferred unsecured grain was harmless if the basis looked strong. Dale answered without sidestepping. I believed operating float would always be there, he said. I was wrong. We commingled pressure and called it normal. That cost people money they had already earned. Wade asked him what changed his view. Dale looked at the floor for a moment, then said, the claim sheets. and seeing 0 beside one name because he required funds before title. He did not ask for restoration. He did not blame markets. He said his role now was product sales, not fiduciary custody, and that line would remain. By year-end 2025, he was still in Sioux Falls, still outside licensed grain management, still repeating the same warning when younger sales staff talked loosely about settlement timing. The county roll call in January 2026 read like a ledger finally balanced. Ben Holter farming, land retained, payment history clean. Lyle Jensen farming fewer acres, stronger ratios, no distressed equipment notes. Carmen Ruiz expanding from stability, herd at 310 pairs and reserve intact. Ethan Pike on his own ground, 35% down preserved. No unpaid grain tickets since 2020. Nora, Grant, Isaac, Megan, Owen, Heidi, Samir, and Tyler all operating, all current, all using reviewed settlement language. Cole and Wade still in production, both now requiring council initials on deferred clauses and both teaching that habit to younger operators at winter meetings. Marlene in regional risk policy, using anonymized county data to train lenders. The bankruptcy trustee retired and fishing as he had planned. The attorney still drafting the same covenant, now requested by counties that had never heard of Redfield before 2020. Bo changed almost nothing visible. The 1994 Chevrolet reached 349,208 miles by late winter, rust unchanged. Shovels still tied down with baling twine because the tie held, and the reminder mattered. The John Deere 4440 still started on cold mornings after block heat and patience. The old 7720 remained in the shed as backup. Painted once, maintained always, never financed. His overalls still carried patches. His annual household spending still sat near $33,000. His net worth moved with land values and treasury yields, yet his operating rule stayed one sentence long. The Murray Grain Reliability Fund held $2 million in endowment principal and paid legal review invoices directly to attorneys, never as cash transfers to applicants. In its first full cycle, it covered 73 contract reviews, flagged 17 clauses for revision, and blocked 7 agreements until settlement language was corrected. Cost of those reviews, $44,676. Potential unsecured exposure avoided in those 7 files alone, $1.12 million based on contracted bushels and delivery windows. Quiet prevention, documented impact. On a bright, hard-cold morning near the end of that winter, Bo parked beside the scale before sunup and unlocked the office. He placed the feed sack on the counter, removed the ledger, and turned to a clean page. The new clerk, 23 and careful, read the posted policy aloud as part of training. Settlement confirmed before title transfer. Segregated funds. Daily reconciliation by close. Bo listened, nodded, and handed her the pen. Outside, the old Chevrolet ticked as the engine cooled. Inside, the first truck of the day rolled onto the scale. Moisture posted. Weight printed. Funds confirmed. Title released after the timestamp, not before. Bo wrote the number by hand in steady block letters, exactly where he had always written it. The man who looked poorest had understood the richest truth in the county. Wealth is not what you show at the scale line. It is what remains under your control when trust gets tested.